now.
Beautiful.
Is there anything you had a question about with what I just said?
I mean, it resonates deeply for me. I do trauma work with people, psychosomatic trauma work, and it's a lot of needing to suspend the stories and actually get into the body and into the being and find where I call them dehydrated structures. So I forget exactly what term you use, but I love the like potentiated phone call that was never answered. It's like most bodies I meet, I use this metaphor, are like a browser with too many tabs open. And so you have that wheel that's just spinning.
Totally.
And so how do we actually start to clear some of those tabs to make space for some, like the past is still playing out in this moment. If we can clear these tabs, we're more available to meet reality cohesively right now.
A great way to put it. I mean, best way to describe it is your midline is your homepage in that analogy. That we don't resonate with the incumbent or natural base or core, so to speak, and we identify with the things that the pop-ups, the things that are most loud, the things that are most new. And because there's threat to it, there's like a conversation to be had on top of the thoughts. So anytime anyone can justify cerebral or conscious coordination to something, they're going to feel like they have more control over it. So it'll feel like they can dialogue with it. They feel like they have more interaction with it. Despite the fact that human beings are limbic creatures, we're emotional creatures, majority of our social interaction is designed by the safety our emotions preside over. So if we don't have a safety in socialization, we're going to become under-social, and we're going to become not necessarily under-human, but we're going to learn behaviors that don't really commodify social interaction.
Yeah.
A lot of downstream effects with that one.
Well, and there's in the social interaction, what I'm hearing in that too is I always say 95% of our social interaction is nonverbal. So there's what's the actual embodied transmission that's coming from me and from you, what are all the nonverbal aspects of our communication happening, physically seen in things like posture or where we're holding tension, and unphysically seen in energy and emotion or baggage we're carrying into the moment. But there's also how available are we to even receive what's happening right now in an embodied way.
Totally. And something that I think is grossly understood is because we have so much of a physical distribution or like a physical allotment of space for our major senses, we often identify the sensations that bridge them, or the sensations that move our face, as sensory stimulus as opposed to motor stimulus, or like input interaction from like contact or whatever it may be. And so the intensity of our senses increases the less sensitive we are, or less coordinated we are with that, with our inputs. And so, for example, for me, my ears, I think, have gotten a little tighter or a little more closed in the time that I perceive threat around the area. So I've had head injuries. I've had a number of different things that have made me a little bit withdrawn around the ear. And I'm tremendously sound sensitive. And it sometimes impacts my vision. If I'm understimulated for too long, then I'll be very light sensitive. And I'm someone that attends to it. It's just that I have injuries that have, or traumas that have fed into exacerbating that reaction. So I'm cognizant of it. I have a lot of skill or coordination with it. And even I have a lot of trouble with it when I get to the point of pushing my stress basket too far. It just goes to show that for people that are unconscious of it, they're so far gone from a good relationship with themselves, let alone a good relationship with other people, that it's almost like having to re-raise a child, or having to like re-rear a human being into feeling safe or healthy.
Yeah. And can you tell me, you said there was you used two words. I think one was motor and one was sensory. Can you tell me what you mean when you use those?
Yeah, so we have two different homunculus. We have a sensory homunculus, we have a motor homunculus. They work toward the effect of movement or input sensation. Um, uh, Sensory mechanics or motor mechanics, so to speak. Like sensory mechanics are largely inputs. What you'd find as a stimulus. Say you're outside and you feel, right now I feel a fan on me. I hear it. I hear the outside. Those are all sensory inputs. Uh, a motor input would be something that comes with motion, or it comes with a little bit more directed force. So there'll be something that kind of perturbates us or shifts our physical body, as opposed to shifts our uh, a sensory body. So it's more interaction with the untangible on the sensory, and it's more interaction with tangible on the motor, or you can see it more on the motor. Um, but at the end of the day, the sensory is more important because it communicates a language that presides over most of our feeling, most of our opinion of things. Before we have language, before we have words to describe the things we do, we have non-visceral, or sorry, non-gesticulative, non-verbal communication, excuse me, and that all has to do with our associative meaning or value towards something. So feeling, behaviors, emotions, memories, those are all limbic, and those are what decide, that's what came before words. So if you're looking at a baby or a dog, why is it you can communicate to them without actually using words? There's a framework of communication that we exist in that's more uh, sensory or felt, less
Mhm.
so heard or watched.
Yeah.
I feel like I answered your question in a very long roundabout way.
No, it's epic. Yeah. I once had a trauma work practitioner invite me. He said, like, when you're listening to someone, listen to them with eyes all over your body.
I love
And
that. Yeah,
that changed my life.
yeah, yeah. You can compare yourself at that point when you no longer watch as if you're watching a TV, but you're watching a mirror. Because that's really why we're social creatures. We see someone interact with something. If they are poorly challenged by it and they manage it well, we admire that and we want to replicate that. If they're heavily challenged by something, dependent on their reaction, we might want to be like that or not be like that, contingent on if it makes them look confident or whatever. And every single thing, I mean, that's why you see people who are kids walking around in clothing that their parents never wore. Like they're being picked up on social cueing that they think is going to identify them as more valuable or give them more tooling further down the road. Um, if you want to skip most things, most people are like the identifying process for an adult, which I'm sure you've experienced and still experience. I experience, like all of us, if we're cognizant of who we are cognizant of how we are. And in creating the how, we have to have a why. Why is our first question word. It's the feeling word. Because if you ask what, it doesn't come with as much oomph. How, not as much oomph. Why is always the one that indoctrinates emotion. And if you can associate your why before anything else, you can probably create a more decisive person. They're going to be more emotion driven, less reward driven, less environment driven. It's going to be mostly the intrinsic why. And that's truthfully like most people get caught up in like, how do I fit into the mold? Don't get caught in that. Find your why, find your limbic pathway, and then you're gonna find other people. They may not look like the way you expected them to look. They may not be doing the thing you expected them to do, but feeling good or feeling your why is more important than having a cool what, having a cool where.
Mhm. Yeah, so I hear that you're answering your what's my why from the limbic system, not the prefrontal cortex.
Yeah, prefrontal cortex is where you get language. So limbic system exists before that, you know?
Yeah. I've been talking a lot recently to people about for joy versus from joy, which I
Uh,
feel like is what you're saying. If we can live life from joy, just innate joy of being, it's right here, right now, it's good to be alive. That feeling from the limbic system, as opposed to for joy, here's what I need to do to have
totally.
more happiness.
Yeah, you're almost like asking permission when you do something for something. I think that there's always an inherent measure of trust if you want to. So you have a business, I have a business. There's a measure of like putting yourself out there and trying to like accomplish what the next thing is, or if you want to take the next step. And for anything is always going to interrupt the momentary presence of something, because there's always going to be that modifier before you can feel something. You have to associate what you're doing it for. And I can't do it from anything because that would suggest that I already have that underlying sensation or underlying emotion as my prevalent benefactor. I like to think that I trust myself. My why is fleshed out enough that I know that I'm a good person. I don't have to doubt if something comes along in my whatever, I'm not expecting it. I'm not going to become threatening to my own future. I'm not going to start to like dissolve and like become chaotic. So trust in myself is huge. And that's not a neocortex driven communication. It's an ambient thing. It's a thought. It's a feeling. And the better that I can communicate my thoughts and feelings without having to visualize how I look in them, the more that they become real. And so I don't think I visualize as much as I trust in the process. And I try to emphatically be the way that I'm trying to be uh, without judgment. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't like the notion of saying I am the thing or faking it till I make it. I think that's nonsense. I like to be where I'm at. And if I honestly can't measure up to where I'd love to be, I'll be honest with that. And I'll like suffer, so to speak, at my lower frequency until I can get rid of whatever the thing is that's holding me down.
Yeah, I was just speaking to someone about this. I mean, when we have these, so when we're first born in the world, we're in pure receptivity. We're just taking the world in. Like, I mean, I actually invite people, you can play with this on a concrete sensory level experience. Like are you up for a little bit of a experiment right now, just for a few? Yeah. So like, as you hear my voice right now, we can use our active drivers, which are incredibly developed in our culture, to like go out in the universe and get sound. But you can also turn those down and turn on your receptive drivers and just let my voice pour into you.
Yeah. I'm more actively a receptor than I am a active driver because my sensation is overloaded usually.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I feel a lot of care hearing that. That resonates for me a lot, because I can drop, like, I mean, you can have the experience of being a newborn baby if you turn all your concrete senses into receptivity, like your sight, instead of going out into the universe to get your sight, you can let your sight pour into you.
That's interesting you frame it like that, because that's usually, it's more relaxed like that. Instead of you creating a visual focal, instead of trying to flex or that's how I designed the entire parasympathetic body thing. I try to get people to ambiently consume sense, or make sense of things without the directive making. Just the sensation comes in, process it as it will. I like that a lot, because people, until they feel, oh yeah, you're right, my eyes are actively pushing out of my head versus they're just catching light.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, my vision has gotten so much better since I stopped focusing so damn hard on things. And human beings also have a really intense orientation to objects, like words or objects we look at, but you can like receive the space, for example, as opposed to just the.
I think I got caught up in the space prior to even identifying what I was doing. I read a lot as a kid. I had some head injuries as a kid, but I identified with observation, less so focus. So I'd be able to read fast without getting caught up on the words. Sometimes like seeing myself, I'm way farther down than I thought, but I read it all. And when I'm out in public, I'll notice a lot of things. And I've gotten into the habit of watching my surroundings more. And I'm sure that's more of a threat behavior than it is an observant behavior. But most people don't understand the far end of it. Like there's some times where I used to be challenged with the idea, am I autistic? Do I have something that's preventing me from being able to be undersensitive or less sensitive? And I think that instead of seeing the like the cause or the effect on myself, the comparative is just how dulled some people can be, and then how much limitation that presides over. Because it's not necessarily like they're at fault or they're suffering or whatever, but in the same way that I handled my issues by jumping headfirst into it, they handled their issues by jumping headfirst into something else. And so there's still that like yelling sound in their ear or alarm blaring in their ear that I haven't turned off in 10 years or whatever.
Yeah.
What have you experienced since you've done FP, since you know a number of people who've done FP? I experience a lot of in and up, carrying the body mass closer to the head. And there's a number of things that like it's a fetal construct. That's something a part of fetal position. It's something that manifests more easy fetal position. But it's specific to the hand side. The butt side doesn't as conveniently hang out here without limiting motion. So it's kind of like a trade-off. What have you seen for people who have done FP, respective of what you're talking about, where they either embrace their sensation or they go the opposite way? Have you seen it as like an opportunity for people to get really invested or really limbically engaged? Do you feel like they get fixated in like a framework that they can't break? How do you experience it?
Yeah, so my experience of FP is if you're really good at FP, I've seen some people get really good at FP, they can construct this person and a body that moves. If they can really top down orient their brain to their body, they can construct a persona and a body that moves really well based on FP principles. But that's one body and one person inside of a collective in a being.
Yeah.
And so the challenge is, it's like somebody like in the, I coach a lot of leaders and startup founders and stuff too. And they have this like, I am enough, I am abundant, I am wealthy. But underneath that in the body, there are stories of I'm not good enough, or shame, or guilt, or I don't belong here. And so you have, we're each individual is actually a collective of personalities and also bodies. And so when I find if people are in their superhero body, they're able to move really well and perform really great, but then crash down into any unresolved traumas or aspects of themselves that haven't been addressed. And the solution is, for me, the answers to this from wholeness with a W is we need to bring all of these bodies and beings to the table and start to resolve them. I define trauma as when we have an experience that's too much for us to process in the moment it's happening. So there's residual experience left over. That's, like you said, there's still a scene playing in our fabric of our being. There's still someone yelling in the speaker, even if we're taking our awareness into this other character and being this souped up, like I'm so cool person. There's still this other little kid crying in the back bedroom that we're not tending to. Agreed. And so for me, I have, it's like I appreciate FP so much I can't put it into words, and it hasn't gotten me what I needed. Like I find I tend to be a very intuitive person, and my practice right now is let me drop my awareness into where these aspects of myself haven't been getting attention. And like, I don't think we don't need more tensions. We need to resolve tensions that are still playing out, that are now dysfunctional. They were functional in the moment they were happening, but they're dysfunctional now because we're not in the same experience. And so if we can resolve those tensions and come from nothing, then we can create tensions that are needed in the moment they're needed, and those tensions can dissolve back into formless.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. I mean, the tensions that most of us corroborate are ones that are limited tensions. They're not tensions that utilize as much collaborative. So most people walk without their arms. Most people will walk with a established gait profile that's moving around their arms or around the direction their hands are pointed. And so there's not I imagine there's not a very clear associative for most people on how their hands manifest their feet. And the crawling perspective that Goda has is one such perspective that I definitely don't agree with. People don't understand that when people or babies are walking like this, the amount of force that runs through their arm is a tremendous amount. And what happens is it's buffeting their lungs, it's buffeting their heart, it's buffeting their throat. And in order for them to be strong enough to stand, it needs to not do that so heavily that they can't breathe or walk or whatever without interrupting these processes. So all it is just force tolerance. It's literally perturbation or the adjustment of the thing, the undulation of the thing, so that it can learn how to brace reflexively in motion. You're never going to hold something still or tight, and then it's going to automatically brace in every dimension that you can manage in motion. It's always a reflexive thing. You cannot consciously predispose yourself to perfect bracing. It's just not something that happens. That being said, when we get to a high enough tolerance of force, the tissue is prepared to tolerate that force, and so it's a little more not stretched, but in a big position to absolve that force without feeling like it rocks us.
Yeah.
And so bigger is going to be something that happens as a byproduct of being able to absolve more force. And that's not going to be bigger in one muscle. It's going to be bigger over the scope of the body. And so as we get stronger and stronger and stronger at loading into the ground, for example, our opposite side hip and our opposite side shoulder, right shoulder, left hip, they're going to start moving more in simpatico. And then right arm, right leg are going to be moving more against that left side. And then there's going to build up as these two sides are moving, what's happening to your centric organ system. It's not going to be moving to your right and then your left and then your right, then your left. It's going to be bracing against it. And as it becomes more full and more robust, the arms start to move against that, not for it. So it's not going to try to lead the organs. It's going to move almost like it's bracing against the motion that the organs are decelerating. And what I've seen with most people who exist in these exercises, they're very coordinated with their hands and feet. They can do all kinds of things where they're moving around their body, but they segment or decompartment their inside body. And you can't, you can associate your biceps here, your triceps there, and you can kind of disassociate the two. You can't disassociate your liver from your kidneys. Like you cannot move with your abdomen half engaged and then some of your abdomen not engaged, because the organs, when we talk fascia, think about like a bunch of bugs caught in a spider web. You touch one bug, all the bugs bounce. That's your organs. You touch your leg, you kind of have a residual bounce contingent on how the superficial fascia is designed. But your intrinsic fascia is way, way, way more quick to design. So it either lump up or it'll start to move well, but it's contingent on where you're developing from. If you're developing from your hands and feet, you're probably going to lump up your inside. If you're developing with the intention to hit your belly and all that, you're going to be developing from the inside. The compounding benefit there is that your organs communicate directly to your brain, your amygdala, your limbic brain. And so it skips the process of having to design, why does this mean, or what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? It jumps directly to why. If your organs feel safe, your brains feel safe. And as we get more robust in our organs, you'll see a number of people on my page being like, wow, I'm getting hot, or I'm sweating now. This is way more intense than I thought. And it's usually a byproduct of how much input registry they have in their organs. And because they're not used to it, and because they can't grab it in the same factor that they would be otherwise, they feel out of control or out of their depth. But when they learn how to stabilize it, not with the grabbing mechanics, but the mechanics that help to reflexively brace the belly, everything goes away. It's almost like they didn't have stress to begin with. They're like, why do I feel so pumped? Why am I so excited right now? And to explain that to someone that's never experienced it, it doesn't exist. It does not exist. It's like talking to someone that's adamant that there's no such thing as life off Earth. And that's only because they've lived on Earth. Like they've never seen space. They've never seen anything beyond it. So they're so like fixed into the awareness. We can't know. We can't know. Just the open-mindedness is usually a stress response or a trauma response. Like you're holding yourself in such a fixed way, your brain starts to get stagnated. It starts to get resolved, even around non-constructive thought.
Mm. Mm. I feel some like juiciness here in that. I want to come back to, you said earlier that in the browser analogy that your center line would be the home page. Is that what you said?
Yeah, your midline.
Your midline would be the home page. Can you say more about that?
Totally. I'm not really sure what the center line is, to be totally honest with you. There's a number of lines that FP refers to that's like, I imagine that's like the forward line. And because there's depth to the midline, it's not just a line, but it is a function or a conduit of energetic function. So like an electrical pole in the center of your body. We started like the first formation of our bottom and top wasn't skeletal, it wasn't neurological, it was like a worm. We formed from butt to mouth. So you know how we form as a butthole first, and then we form up to what becomes our brain. We call it a deuterosome. A worm, it forms like this, the spinal cord forms in it, and then your neural line, or I forget what they call it, your neural, whatever, the thing that coats your spinal cord, forms inside of that. And then your brain, and then your skeleton, whatever. What that means is you have a suspensive system inside that's not tensile, it's pressure. It's a tube. So if that tube gets smaller, it can hold less pressure. And it will hold less pressure, and the ribs will start to shrink and consolidate around that midline. The reason why the midline is so emphatically important is because it's the first thing we really relate to without knowing it. Your throat, your breath, you move your eyes around it, it's where we twist from. People think we rotate from our spine. We rotate from our throat. So reason why it's fixed to the throat. You can't breathe if your throat compresses or contracts over much in rotation. So if you turn your head and you have a very, very tight throat, you have to offset it in order to be able to rotate with your airway. It's why our spine shifts position, because we have a bad airway neck relationship. But if we create the airway, that is with vacuum, that's what I teach people. I'm moving from the greater throat muscles. I'm not moving from my neck muscles. So it's almost like these guys configure to the inner form. And as I get things on the outside to form around the things that are on the inside, I start to support or supply stability to the already inherent neurological function that I have available to me. So like internal rotation or spindle or any of these things that I go to talks about, where it's like the what is it, the spiral, that's built into you. Your second bone, or sorry, your second part of the limb is two bones. This is one bone. In order for them to work together, we have to have the dynamic of being able to rotate into that outside bone, rotate into that inside bone. But what that means is the structure is capable of creating a spiral. That does not mean we're trying to create or fabricate this. It's built in. It's built in. We just have to support or stabilize it, because if we don't, then it's not going to inhibit or prevent the motion, and we're going to stay stuck in that spindle wherever we like to use it. The midline is that base. So instead of us working to be like really tight in our shoulders, that's why we're here, because we have too much spindle into our hand. The torque has gone from midline to exterior. Same with feet. You see people that walk around where they're like this. That's because they've torqued themselves into the homunculus or big toe, your biggest innervation, or your thumb, your biggest innervation. These both sit on the inside of the hand. It's easiest to stay spindled because the clavicle and because of your inner groin or your like your outer calf, for example, they all attach to your most opposable instrument on the hands and feet. They just like to fix you into grounding into internal rotation. So you might commodify putting more weight just because you have more nerves in that area. Now, if we don't listen to those external nerves, but we listen to how they feedback or how they stabilize back into our core, we're trying to stabilize our organs, right? I want to be able to talk to you without feeling like the force that I'm walking around is impacting the way I speak. So you notice how it came to be more projective. I had to like hit the right area and know how it wasn't affecting my throat. Well, most of us won't talk like that. We won't talk as if we're bracing our airway. We'll get tight with it, and then we'll talk from the tension. And the idea is we want to create as much space and as much awareness of how much force is coming through us, so we don't loosen up our grip on ourselves and try to grip the force around us. We want to maintain the ability to like fall down the stairs, but be okay. But most people try to catch themselves, so they try to push the ground away from them. You just need to be intact with your system, so that when you fall, instead of you flexing so as to create big, you just need to protect yourself, flex into yourself. Most people, if they create, I know I'm getting way off track here, but most people, like the bicep, for example, they'll flex into the biggest part of the belly of the bicep, and so they won't know how the bicep attaches into the elbow. And so they can't create the pull of the forearm backward to create as much tension as they would otherwise, just because they're flexing their bicep into their shoulder. It's a bicep, not a one set. So you need to create the two attachments. Tricep has three attachments. There's a lacking awareness of the attachments. There's a big awareness of the blood volume, or like the intensity where it runs through. And people will get fixated into the muscle that's easier to construct than the one that covers more surface area, because it has better attachments, or it has better muscle build, or more motor neurons that have seen active utility. And at the end of the day, what we need to pay attention to is input registry. So the more that we try to essentially brace around motion, or inputs that come into our visceral body, starts to check our abdomen, our ribs start to get a little more dense, and so we don't have to guard, we don't have to protect ourselves anymore. And if we're dense enough to not protect our visceral body, because I can lose my arm, I'm going to stay alive. I cannot lose this. Anything here that gets lost, I'm not alive, or I have a definite deficit. Your hand does not decide how you move, your intrinsic body does. If we can reestablish the torque and tension around our organ system, specifically around throat to butt, then our spine has a pressure system to follow. And that way we're going to have a ballast on the inside that's as long as our pressure system, or as long as our spine, and dictates how our spine receives load. There's one other thing inside midline. It's chakra points. If you want to go through, it's literally where the chakra runs. So like, there was a better understanding of energetics before science was here, and it all factors in the same thing. They felt it. They couldn't have known it by way of like seeing it, right? The chakra wasn't visible. I mean, I'm sure there's some people that argue energetic visibility, but I'm saying like as a large, you can't convince a populace of that. You have to see like some people will feel it, some people will feel it, and then you can teach some people to register change, but it's all sensation. Anything that like martial arts, dance, music, everything in that respect is sensation. You're not just operating in a rhythm that is patterned in your brain.
Right.
You're playing into all the sensory rhythm. Yeah, midline's your core. It's the centric line.
In the I know another trauma work practitioner, a psychotherapist, whose work is basically around, in energy work you call it the central channel. There's a 3-inch wide column of basically clear light in the center of our
Midline.
being.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And it's like that's where we can, I don't know what the word that's coming to me is, like unzip, but it's like that's where we actually can move. I have a long tendency of like stuffing sensation down below my hips. And so a lot of mine has been like breathing into an area and listening, not from the mind, but from the body, what's happening here, and then breathing that up through the central channel in a way that it essentially clears, like a browser tab closes. And then where I was numb before, there is now starts to be some sensation, or where I couldn't contact before, there starts to be more refined, subtle nuance awareness. And the being is coming back online in a way. Like I have a long history of disassociating out of the body into awareness or into thought based on like stimulus being too much in the body. And so now the game is, can I consciously bring awareness back into these places that I ejected from and live the experience now that I couldn't be with while it was happening, and close those phone lines or browser tabs or inputs that came and weren't metabolized, resolve those, and then be more fully available for what's actually happening in this moment.
I assume I went the opposite direction, where I was input was my language, but I couldn't rationalize the disconnect between brain and body. Like I would live in my body, and if certain stimulus would, I wouldn't be able to understand why certain stimulus would be uncomfortable, and I'd try to resolve it by like really delving into the sensation as opposed to the thought. Which I imagined injury or trauma just because it was there was no rational like consistency about it. It was just whenever my stress bucket was too much.
Well, the thing is too that those, so we can develop deep intimacy with the sensations by bringing our awareness into them, like you're talking about. But the question is, how does that sensation want to resolve itself? So when I support people doing, and I'm not a psychotherapist, but you know, a lot of my clients are, right? It's like what I support people doing is bringing the awareness into the sensation, and then not in the head, but in the sensation, seeing what does this want?
Right.
And then it actually has its own intelligence and how it wants to resolve itself.
So there's an ancient Asian practice, and I'm not sure if it was Taoism or if it was not even a martial practice in the first place, but it referred to there being two intelligences, obviously of the mind and then the one of the body. And in growing your relationship to body, you're growing the intelligence of your body. And that would be the priority in life, that as you get more refined in your ability to design your body's intelligence, your brain isn't the guiding one. It's more who you are, what you are. And truthfully, I feel like that's the thing that I've been doing for most people, which is input tolerance is at a lesser degree than they have a tolerance for. Like people have just like not really trained their inputs, and so they get overwhelmed pretty immediately from having too much or a surplus of non-coordinated inputs, and so their first inclination is to try to turn it off, reception. And I want people to recognize that when they turn it on, they give themselves an access to a higher functioning or a higher intensity vibration that may be threatening right now, but as they learn to accommodate the intensity of it, they start to be higher performing. And the more intelligent our body is, the more we start to learn or pay attention to that we don't notice cerebrally. We just, it's intuition or it's whatever. And I think that most of us are very stupid compared to how we could be really right. Like the scope of internal intelligence is so much more. Like babies have it, babies have it, animals have it, and some really spectacular adults have it. But most adults have like wiped themselves clean of how much robustness they could have, and they fake it. They fake their robustness. They show you what they can measure. The thing that I see more often than not for people coming out of these programs is they like to observe a behavior, and the notion of feeling a behavior is almost like it's not something that happened. And these same people are also not doing vision exercise, so it's not so much about what they register the being. It's not about what they can see, it's just about what they can perceive. I think that people who have to fixate on the extremity are so interbulated or so intensified by how much inputs they've neglected that it's almost like their own inside body fights them whenever they try to look into it. And so it's like a threat being close to themselves until they resolve to be as far from that part of themselves as they can, because it's only threat there. And like being in touch with the emotions. Like one thing I can definitively say, if the guy that runs FP is in a lot of ways emotionally unresolved, like there's a lot of things that he says are not okay to do emotionally. And then when you see him move around, he's intense. Like if I were to see a partner treat a partner like that, I'd be like, that's not a good partner relationship. And it's only to say that he's not very understanding of feelings. He's very understanding of the observable action. And that's not something that we operate off. We don't teach children like that. You don't accept a partner like that. When we make mistakes, we're not making conscious mistakes. We're making unintentional mistakes. So where are you creating the allowance of being a person, or where are you training the real scope of being a person? If you say you have to be, like you say, wearing this part of your body, wearing this whatever, this costume within the closet of costumes.
Mhm. Yeah. There are words coming to me. Give me 1 second. Yeah, it seems that, I mean, there's even, there's to me, it's like a hyper masculine top down orientation. Even the cueing in FP is, you do it. I've never understood why we would cue through language. Like that seems an incredibly inefficient way to cue versus like touching a specific area. Like when I was doing FP stuff, I would touch someone and say, okay, breathe right here, as opposed to breathe into your QL or something, because you have to go top down and wire a neuro myofascial patterning top down to breathe into an area, versus touching somewhere and having awareness come to it, which then bottom up informs the brain. Okay, this is the territory in my awareness which is receiving an input stimulus right now.
So the bottom up stuff is literally just afferent feedback to say how well are we balancing. The top down is to direct that balancing or to manage around the tertiary things. We are top down, we're brain down, but we do develop brains in our lower body. Like our gut is a big one, our hands and feet are big ones, our groin is a big one. But if we don't develop those brains and we don't have the connect the dots working, we're probably going to be a little bit slack, or we're going to have a lot of more force going into certain parts. You're doing something that, I mean, my system is intended to absolve the effort of having to go through the visualization process. I want for people to feel the top down. I want for them to feel the bottom up, and I want for them to know that they have the control inside out. And so I teach them to use their own touch and start to identify, because there's two forms of touch when you're touching yourself. There's the probing and there's the receiving. And if you're probing with your hand, oftentimes you might get confused that you're being touched into your hand, like your body's touching your hand. And that's where a lot of people get stuck, where they're feeling the feedback on the thing they're probing with.
Interesting.
And if we get stuck in that framework, then every input or every output is an input. And that's fucked up. Because that means that everything you do is something being done to you. And so it justifies never being conscious of your actions, or never being like in charge of your actions. You're always just doing what you're whatever doing.
That was very illuminating for me. Yeah,
Awesome.
That was incredibly well said.
I appreciate it. The things that handle that, heat is one of the biggest ones. I think that's the most commodifying sensory inputs that you can use, because heat is not something that travels through bad blood flow. You'll have good heat in your hands, but if you don't have good heat here, then you'll know that you've been using this guy without this guy, right? Or if you have heat bleeding out of areas, which most people do, they radiate as opposed to irradiate. They're losing body heat, and they're losing a stability metric as their byproduct, because it's not like an ambient profile of this is how I feel right now. So if your brain can't register a consistency, the change is what they'll register. And the change is what we're going to fight, as opposed to fighting for that consistency. I teach people how to create visceral things, like how to make your hands hot. It's not something that like people teach. I do a lot of things that I know I've leveraged since I was young. There are sensory mechanisms that I feel are very, very guided or very leverageable. And I only went with them because I found out how important they were after the fact. And I had built a skill. I was lucky enough to have them already. I met someone who taught me that they were of value. And I was like, all right, let's start teaching people how to feel the body like I feel it. And so I taught people like different lines, rotational vectors, like your fingers are all the rotational vectors of your limb. Like this guy right here is the one we're stuck in. This one too. And that's why we have that inside shoulder. Clavicle is a thumb. This is your inner rotator. This is your outer rotator. They both do the same thing on the opposite side of your middle finger. Middle finger is the midline. And that's the separation. Your median nerve has the radial and the ulnar involved in this one. So if most people fix the way their fucking hands work, excuse my language, they would have the ability to fix all the rotation, all the planting, and all the shoulder hip issues that they have, just because it's the nerve. If your nerve isn't fed in through the entire tissue line, it's going to start to skip shit, and it's going to start to rotate freely. Like this is going to rotate without the remainder of that radius. And so people will rotate the nerve, feeling the nerve go to the end of its channel without it moving through the middle of its channel. And that's how people operate.
When you get an impinged nerve, you get a pinged neural pathway into the hand.
Yeah,
right
tennis
there.
elbow is
Tennis
used
elbow.
for that. Yeah.
Wow, that is so genius.
It's honestly sensory feedback. When you learn more about neurology, you find out what the brain prioritizes. And if you listen to or look at it from a perspective, a lens of brain's priority as opposed to my relationship with it, start to understand that, oh, I have my relationship with it because my brain couldn't have a relationship here, or it was interrupted here, or it was interrupted here. And when you say you're listening to the body, what you're doing is, instead of doing the thing most people do, they close their eyes and they try to bring their eyes down their throat, because this is your third eye, essentially, your throat. It's like you breathe between your eyes. Your throat allows for you to interocept. So your inner eye is actually your ability to breathe and perceive your breath. So in any scope of being able to interocept, you're actually just not being overwhelmed by your breath. What most people get fixated in is, instead of looking through their throat in a big observable way, they constrict their throat, they close their eyes, and they roll into the back of their head, and they try to use the awareness here to in-see. And so they'll usually be like this, almost like looking at the thing with closed eyes. And it's because people are trying to visualize or visually in-see. We get so confused by our own sensory mechanics that we do them wrong and don't even know we're doing them wrong.
So do you ever take in, I also notice I have a call in 6 minutes, so let me just, maybe this can be my last question for now, but do you ever take in reality from the center line, from the midline, from the central channel?
Oh, all the time. I try to increase my tolerance there. So you see the ball in the chest exercise I do?
I've seen it, yeah. So you lie on your back and you put a 50-pound ball on your chest.
Yep. I also do stuff with weight on my head, or I'll do a number of things that essentially constrict my midline. And then I'll do some breathing exercise that makes me open up my throat more. And then I start to feel how my organs start to shift when I change or displace the pressure inside of myself. And then I make it so I can't move the pressure into a place that's easy to move through. And so it starts to make it so that instead of me being able to mechanize into softer, mechanically accessible tissue, I start to push from my organs into my spine and my rib cage. And that identifies, when you're laying on your back, your spine is an arch. It's like the arch of a foot. And so if it doesn't interact like that, it'll probably start to interact from the heel or the toes. And if it functions from the heels or the toes, then you're going to compromise how you actually ground. Just how most of us work. We'll either operate from the nerves or the nerves. We won't operate from the dullness.
Wow. Yeah, incredibly well said.
But it all overlays with stuff you already understand.
Yeah. I'm incredibly inspired by what you're sharing, man. This is really awesome.
Happy to hear it.
Yeah.
Awesome, dude. Yeah. It'll be good when you experience it, and then you can start to like translate it or communicate it to other people of the same truthfully, this is a therapy that I have experienced. Men who have not dealt with a lot of their limbic response will experience a tremendous amount of like carryover into their emotional state. So there'll be like, there will be an emotional process for a lot of men who have not come to terms with self. And then for women, it's identifying a lot of powerful constructs or like intrinsic sensory mechanics that make them feel more robust and full. And I think that's just more qualified by being a man when you have a little more muscle or something like that. And there's more heat, there's more intensity with that. And when women get to that state, they embody more of their emotion without having to like cater to other people being comfortable for them. And that's something that most people do in general. But I've noticed that men get more comfortable catering to themselves, women get more comfortable in the same catering to themselves, but for different reasons. And emotions are important. If I can get more people on my team who function in that process, I can get a lot more people to resolve emotional distress and then become better at communicating what they're experiencing. And that's my goal. I want to turn this into like a Tony Robbins style course where I can put my hands on someone, but I can also ask them what they're experiencing and help guide them through creating that connectivity instead of it just being what you feel is what you get.
Mhm.
Got to be able to coordinate that.
Yeah, well, I feel like I have a ton more questions. I also know I need to go, so I'm excited to experience it. I'm excited we can just be in touch around next steps and whatnot. But yeah, let's I'm in for sure, whatever that means.
Awesome. I appreciate you. Yeah, I definitely need the help of people who can. I want to get more FP people in because I've seen that in the way that I've seen the stress, it's probably one of the ones that reduces midline exposure more than anything else. And you can see how much tone or sympathetic tone comes as a byproduct, especially around the midline. Like this is the most toned part of the body on someone that does FP, and that's not the way it should be. Your belly should be relaxed. Like a dad bod is not so far off from relaxed body. And if I can get, yeah, we'll talk more on it. But I've done a lot with FP people, but it's individual by individual basis. I'm trying to get like that connectivity into the community where I can just be like drawing people in, and then I can start doing in their same way a bunch of workshops that have dozens of people in them, and they can get hands-on work. They can feel relief, acceptance, or like see how other people are finding all that kind of stuff instead of how you have to do it perfectly right, an allowance for how you don't have to be perfect.
I have a collective of well-being practitioners from a whole range of modalities, a lot of FP people, some chiropractors, functional medicine people. We're doing brain health, gut health, epigenetics, the whole gamut. But I sent you my cell number. If you text me, I can add you to the Signal group, and then I can put this recording into that chat. It would be a pretty good audience for more people finding your stuff. And folks in there are already talking about you anyway and your stuff. So it'd be good to have you in there.
That's cool. Yeah, I hear it from people. Like I hear about more conversations being had about MovMed than I do have conversations about MovMed.
That's cool. That's really exciting.
Yeah. All right, man. It was a pleasure talking to you. A pleasure meeting you. I just texted you, by the way. I sent you my number, by the way. Yeah, I'd be interested to see what we can do when we get a little more time to talk on next steps.
Yeah, I think cool. Appreciate you.
Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll talk to you later.
Okay. See you.